Okay, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Rocks. Currently, our program has enemies coming out on the stage, and they follow a particular pattern of waypoints around the stage. We have bullets that are shooting, but we're going to do two things in this episode. We're going to actually do a hit test object or collision detection to see when the bullet hits a particular enemy. We're also going to delay the actual firing. If I run the program right now, it turns out that, let's see if I can get in here. It turns out that the enemies are all coming in really close together, so it looks like one long sort of centipede. So what we're going to do to change that is we're going to come into main game, and I'm going to make a couple of quick changes right away. I want to create a variable called enemy delay, and so I will come back up here, and I've already created that. Enemy launch delay, I'm setting that equal to 0. So this variable, I don't need this guy, but this variable enemy launch delay is going to be used when I init an enemy. And so right here, I'm going to say if, or actually, let me change that. I will go ahead and say enemy launch delay. This is going to be decremented. So each time I get to the point, I'm going to take away. So every time I enter the frame, I'm going to hit this point. And so this is going to be decremented once each frame. And the frames are happening about 24 times a second. So I'll say in here, I'll say if the number of enemies is less than 10 and I'll use the logical operator and something else also has to be true. Remember when I use and, both of these statements have to be true in order for the whole statement to be true. So I want to say enemy launch delay is, let's say, less than 0. And so what I'll do is, if it ever gets, I keep decrementing it by 1, and when I come in here, the first time, since I set it equal to 0 up on top, the very first time I come in here, it's going to set it to something less than 0. This will be true as long as the number of enemies is less than 10. I'll come in here. So I will do all of this, which is essentially initiating or making a new instance of the enemy. And then down here, I will put in another instance, and I'll say this guy is equal to 48. And so what that means is, since I'm running 24 frames a second, I will be taking each frame off 1, so it should take about 2 seconds for the next guy to go. So I'm going to say 2-second delay, and now if I run the same program, they come out and they should be about a 2-second delay. If I change this to, let's say, 24, I will get a 1-second delay. And so I have control over how fast I want the enemies to be coming out. In addition to that, remember I can change the speed. If I'm in enemies, right now the speed is kind of fast. We'll change this to 5, and we'll see the enemies will come out more slowly, but again, they're coming out every second. And so I can change the frequency with which they come out as well as the speed that they travel. Okay, moving on. Now I want to come down, and I've already got in main game, I've got my waypoint set up. We're going to change that in the next lesson, the way we set that up. But for right now, when I init enemies, I have waypoints right here. And so my enemies are going to, when I create an enemy, I receive an array of waypoints. I set that equal to waypoints, which is going to be visible anywhere inside this class. And what I want to do at this point is I'm going to create a couple more loops in main game. And to do this, I'm going to make another event listener. In fact, I'm going to make 2 more event listeners. And one is going to be called the enemy loop. And the other is going to be called the bullet loop. So I'm going to do these every time I come into a frame. I'm going to loop through the enemy array, and I'm going to loop through the bullet array. Incidentally, I need to set those guys up. I've created already my variable waypoints, which is an array of waypoints. I'm also setting up 3 more arrays, enemies, bullets, and turrets, and I'm going to start packing all of my objects into these arrays. The reason is I need the functionality of an array in order to check for do the hit detection or collision detection. And what that means is, to do collision detection, I've got to load all of my enemies into an array, load all of my bullets into an array, and by using a nested for loop, I'm going to test each each element of the enemy array against each element of the bullet array every frame, which seems really tedious, but of course computers are very fast, so it's going to work really nicely for us. Okay, so let's say right up here, I'll create a function, and I will call this guy enemy loop, and the enemy loop is simply going to loop through all of the elements of my loop, or of my enemy array. And so I don't need to return anything from this array, and he's ready to go. I do need, since it's coming from an event listener, I do need to have an event parameter. So this is going to be an event of type event, and in here I'm just going to create a for loop, and the for loop is going to go through my entire array of enemies, and it's going to update them. Now you may be wondering why we're doing this, since we're already updating them inside the enemy class, but we're going to make a change there. So I'm going to say a variable, and I'll set enemy index, and I will set this equal to, this is going to be an int by the way, and I'll set this equal to 0 starting at the beginning of the array, and I'm going to go to EI is less than, as long as this condition is true, I'm going to continue to go through loop, so EI wants to be less than the length of enemies. So however long enemies is, so I'll say dot length, and I want to do -1 here because, remember, the array, always the first index is 0. And what that means is, if the length is 10, I'm not going to go from 1 to 10, I'm going to go from 0 to 9. So if the array were actually have a length of 10, this guy's starting at 0, 0 through 9 adds up to 10 elements. And so that's what I'm looking for. In any case, I'm going to go the enemy index, I will simply increment that here, and all I want to do at this point is I'm going to come in and say enemies, which is my enemy array, and I will set that enemy index dot, and I'm going to say update enemies. Or is it update enemy? Anyway, this is a method that I created back in the enemy class. Let's see where that is. If I look at here, I've got update enemy. That's a method. It's a public function. That means I can access it from my main method, my document class, which is called main game. And I am going to run this. So what that means is I no longer am going to be calling that from this event listener. So I need to get rid of the event listener. I also need to get rid of this parameter. And to get rid of that parameter, now if I run this update enemy, the enemies are not running. Okay, I'm not sure why. So let's go in. I didn't save this. Let's see if it works now. And I've got an error. Oh, I haven't created the bullet loop yet. Let's go ahead and save that. And we're still, okay, now we're running. Okay, so that looks good. So instead of in enemies, before I had an event listener, so I commented that out. I'm no longer using that. Inside update enemy, I'm no longer calling this from the event listener, so I no longer have a parameter here. I'm now calling this from main game. And so from main game, I've got this guy called enemy loop, and enemy loop is going to update each of the enemies in this array. All of my enemies are packed into an array. Remember, when I created my enemies, I've got to have this line of code now where I push the enemies into an array. The enemies exist in the array. I'm adding that enemy to the stage. I'm updating my launch delay. But each frame now, I'm updating the enemy from the main document class, which is right here. So enemies, enemy index, that's going to be one of my enemies in the array. And I simply call the same method that I was calling before with the event listener. I'm going to do essentially the same thing for the bullets array. I'll go ahead and copy that down, and instead of enemy array, I will call this, instead of enemy loop. I will call this bullet loop. And bullet loop, again, is going to be called from this event listener. And in this event listener, I'll call bullet loop. Bullet loop is right down here. And this guy is going to update the bullets. So when I create bullets now, here's my make bullet. And so this function is going to be called from, oh, where is this called? Notice it's not being called from anywhere in my document class. I actually did this also. I came into my turret class and I have fire turret. When I fire the turret, it says if parent does not equal null, parent is movie clip, make bullet. Okay, what this is doing is this is kind of working backwards. This is going back to the main document class, and it's calling the make bullet method back in the main document class. So let's go ahead and see where that is. Make bullet is right here. It's in the main document class, and I set up my variable. I've got bullet x is equal to turret x, bullet y is equal to turret y, so my bullet initiates in the same place as the turret. Bullet rotation is equal to turret rotation, and finally bullet mask. So this is going to exist where the mask that I created back in lesson probably 2 or 3, and then I add child bullet. Bullets.push, this is where I push the bullets into the array, and so now I have, just like I have an array of enemies, I also have an array of bullets. So I need to change this. I'm going to change this to, instead of enemy index, I'm going to say bullet index, and bullet index. I'm going to change this to bullet index, and I'm going to change this guy to my bullets array. And so now I should go through this entire array. Instead of updating enemy, I'm going to update bullet. And so the one thing I have to change over here, again, is I'm going to comment out the event listener, and I need to get rid of this parameter since I'm not using an event listener to call this function now, and I've got an error. Let's go ahead and see what's going on. Bullet lop. Okay, bullet lop is not the correct name of the function. It's going to be bullet loop. Let's try this again. So every frame I come in and I've got some errors. Okay, so right now I do have bullets moving and I do have everything working well, but I've got some errors, so I'll go ahead and figure that out in a minute. It says a term is no properties are defined in bullet loop. So something is wrong inside bullet loop, and I'm not sure what it is. I'll have to figure that out later, but I've got bi int equals 0, bi is enemies.length -1, bi plus plus, that all looks good, and update bullet. Okay, so at some point I have something undefined in here. But I think I'm going to figure that out later. Right now, instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to change this. I've gone to update bullets, and I will put a statement in here where I'm going to create a for loop to trace through. Now, this is going to be a nested for loop. I'm going to do for, I'm going to come through all of the bullets, okay, and then I'm going to do another for loop to go through each of the enemies. And so I've got an array of bullets and an array of enemies. Now what I'm going to do is go backwards through this. And so it's going to look a little bit different, but I'm going to start at the top of the array and go backwards. So to do that, I will go ahead and here say bi is equal to bullets. My index is the bullet index, so I've got bi, and oops. And so I'll go ahead and say bi, take that back, sorry. Since I'm working backwards, I need to do the length at this end, -1. And then I'm going to take bi is greater than, instead of less than, greater than or equal to 0. And then I'm going to say bi minus minus. So what in effect I'm doing is I'm starting at the end of the array and working backwards from the largest value, and I'm going to go start working backwards. As long as bi is greater than or equal to 0, I'll come into this loop. And I'm going to do the same thing in effect for the enemy loop. And so to do that, instead of bi, I need ei. And instead of bullets, I need enemies. Okay, and over here, instead of BI, I need EI, and here I need BI. So I'm doing the same thing, and so I'm going through, I'm checking, let's see, when BI, go to the last element in bullets, and I'm going to compare it against each of the elements. I keep going through this loop until I go all of the enemies in the enemy array. Then when I come through all these, I come back in here, I go to the next second greatest element in the bullets array, and I go through all of the elements inside the enemies array again. And if there is, for instance, a collision, I can test that by putting an if statement right here. And I say if something is true, there's a collision, I'm going to do something. Now, how do I know if there's a collision? This is kind of the something that's specific to Actionscript, and I can use a function called hitTestObject. So I need to test a particular ship against a particular enemy. The way that I do that is inside here, I'm going to look at my bullets element, and so I say BI, and I will attach to that a method called hitTestObject. And hitTestObject is something provided for us by the good people at Adobe, and I will send into this function a parameter, and it's going to be the enemies sorry, not dot, but it's going to be enemies index. Okay, now you'll notice that inside here I did not use the keyword bar, and the reason I didn't do that, well, I never closed this guy either. Oh, I made a mistake. This stuff, let me get rid of this for a minute. So this for loop needs to be separate from what comes next. And so notice that I've already got, within this one function, I've already declared BI as a variable, and I'm using it in this loop, so I can't declare it a second time within the same scope. The reason I can declare EI, or enemy index here again, and I do need to declare this guy, I'm going to say variable index is an integer. The reason I need to do that down here is because even though I did it up here, this is a different function, okay? And so in this function up on top, this guy can only be seen between these two curly brackets. This guy can be seen anywhere inside this function, so I need to not redeclare him. In any case, I go through I loop through all my bullets, I update it, then I start this loop where I check each element of my bullets array against each element of my enemies array, and I check to see if they're touching by using hitTestObject, and if they are touching, then I want to remove them. And so removing them really requires two steps. The first step I'm going to do is to, let's say, remove the enemy, and then I will remove the bullet. But each of these takes two steps. So to remove the enemy, I first want to remove the enemy from the stage. And so I will say remove child, and I will take the enemy, the current enemy. The current enemy that I'm taking off is going to be in enemies, and it will be in EI is the correct index. So that's I'm removing that guy from the stage. But it's not enough to remove him from the stage. I also have to remove him from the array. And so to remove him from the array, I go into enemies, and I use a method, again, that the good people at Adobe created, and it's called splice. And to get rid of this guy, I just have to say which element of the array. Well, the element of the array that I'm getting rid of is EI, and how many elements am I getting rid of? One. Okay? So these two steps, and they should be in this order too. You don't want to remove it from the array before you remove it from the stage, otherwise I'll be removing a different element from the stage. So again, remove child, this is going to be bullets now. And I want to remove which bullet from the array? I want to remove BI. And then, I'm sorry, I want to remove that from the stage, not from the array. And after I've removed it from the stage, I want to remove this guy from the array. So remove from the stage, remove from the array, remove from the stage, remove from the array, and that looks like it's going to work. Let's go ahead and see if this is functioning, and it comes out, and they are not working. Okay, I think I'll stop right there and see if I can figure that. One of the problems that I've got is that in main game, I made a mistake when I copied this over. I've got bullets.length. Here I had, I guess, in some place I had bullets in the wrong place. So I have to be consistent. Bullet index is with bullets, bullet index, bullet index. I've got enemy index, enemies, enemy index, enemy index. Up here, I think I copied this down from above and I didn't change this guy to bullets.length. So this was enemies.length. And the other thing is I want to go from 0. This guy is going to be less than bullets.length, so I don't want to have -1 here. So a couple little errors. But if I run the program now, this guy will run out. I get delays, and then if I shoot these guys, I will have my enemies disappear. Okay, so that is actually working. So it's detecting the collision. Later on we'll add explosions and so forth. I still am getting some minor errors. I'm not sure why. I'll look into that, but that's going to be it for lesson 6. So that's all for today. Bye-bye.